Well, hello everyone. Yeah, 24 hours later, a video I did yesterday, and now we're living in a much more unsafe world. For a lot of people who have been brought up recently, they've never experienced this sort of conflict and the worry that we've seen in the escalation of war in Europe. Obviously, I was brought up in the 60s, and I remember, World War II hadn't, ended all that long ago, and still the Soviets were putting down any opposition in the countries that they railroaded in after World War II. And after the Berlin Wall fell down and it all rode back and everybody got their own independence, we have a guy now in Russia who isn't happy to be controlling Russia. He wants the Soviet Union back. And today's events are massively worrying, and I worry about, obviously, youngsters especially have got an awful lot on the place as it is. This is the first time that they would have had the concerns that I was brought up with in the 60s, where you always thought that potentially 60s, 70s, that there might be a nuclear war. It looks like we're on the brink of something now. So I thought, in doing that, I thought to myself, I wanted to do the video I'm about to do, just in case it all goes tits up very soon. Yeah, so a lot of people on Facebook have done like their top 10 albums, but there's no explanation of why that they are in their top 10. It's just like people do it. But what I thought I'd do is I just do this. I took my top 10 vinyl albums, and a lot of them are during my whole witnessy life. And I just thought I'd talk about these albums, and hopefully people may know some of these albums, but more importantly, people might not know these albums, and they may be intrigued to actually then listen to them on Alexa and discover them all for themselves. So without further ado, let's go on to the first album we have here. This is, of course, Abbey Road by the Beatles. And it was the first album I ever got into, and the reason how I got into this album is that my friend, who's a witness in Ellesmere Port, called David Harvey, he had an elder brother called Tony who was married with kids, and he had a vast record collection, and we used to go to Tony's house. This is when I was about 18, I think, 17, 18, and Tony used to try to educate both his younger brother and his younger brother's best mate, me. And he played this album, Abbey Road. Now, I'd never heard any tracks on Abbey Road in my life. I was aware of the Beatles, but to me the Beatles were all Mop Tops, She Loves You, blah, 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 blah. I didn't really know this album at all. And although I do remember in my lifetimes some Beatles songs out, I remember when Yellow Submarine was out, which is either 66 or 68, I don't know which one, being played in a jukebox in Helsby Hill. Was it Frodsham Hill? Can't remember. And I do remember All You Need Is Love being on the very last episode of an iconic 60s programme called The Prisoner, which I watched in 68, I think it was. I watched that, and actually we went to the location where it was getting filmed in 68 in Port Miriam. But this album was a complete game changer for me. Abbey Road, he played it for us, and apart from one stinker of a track, which is Be Quiet, which is McCartney's Bang Bang Maxwell Silver Hammer. This is a fantastic album. Side 2 is just absolutely incredible, and he played it for us, and it was a game changer for me. And over subsequent years, I went backwards in the Beatles canon, and I started off going back from here to the White Album, and the Magical Mystery Tour, Sergeant Pepper, Revolver, Rubber Soul, and all the rest of them until we end up with Please Please Me. And now I've got all the Beatles recordings on CD. But anyhow, this album here was a game changer for me. It was the first album I ever got to, and it was the first one that I loved the artwork and really got into how important the artwork is in relation to the actual songs. The next one that we have is coming up is this album called Crime of the Century by Supertramp. I don't know how this happened, but somehow, and this album had been out for quite a wee while, but somehow a lassie in our hall called Janetta Paprocki in Ellesmere Port had really got into a song on this album called Hide in Your Shell. And back in those days, of course, different to these days. These days, if you find a really good song, you then just put it on your Facebook. Oh, everybody should listen to this. It's a great song. Or just send it to your mates through WhatsApp or what have you. But of course, back in those days, if you wanted to show somebody that you discovered a fantastic song, you had to go to their house, or they came to your house. And I went to where she lived with her mother, father and two brothers, and she took me into her bedroom and says, you should listen to this. Now the reason why I did that is because prior to this she'd written down the lyrics to Hide in Your Shell and given them to me, and this is when I was 17ish. And the lyrics were really meaningful, and it was the first time I'd actually read lyrics out of the context of the song, because obviously the problem with songs is that being somebody's interested in the music, I don't really listen to the lyrics, but when they had the lyrics taken out of the song of Hide in Your Shell, they were a lot more meaningful. So she played me this song, and it still does it for me. Hide in Your Shell from this album, Crime of the Century, and the actual song Crime of the Century, the last track and side to, is an absolute stonker. And although this doesn't come into my top 10, I just thought I'd give this another mention, was the other Supertramp album, which probably most people are aware of, which is Breakfast in America. And the reason why I thought I'd just mention this, although it's not in my top 10, it's got I never bought this album at the time. I only bought this album quite recently, and the reason why I did is because a couple of reasons why. I had a friend called Stephen Burden, who wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, who I went youth hosteling with when I was like 16 and 17, and we were planning on another youth hostel trip into Wales, and he had gone off with another youth hostel trip with his school friends, and they were staying in a youth hostel in a town in North Wales called Llangollen, and they'd gone out, they'd cycled down there, like from Ellesmere Port down to Llangollen, and they were out then walking, and a van turned around the corner, and the van's left mirror hit Stephen in the head and put him in a coma, and he never came out of it. They eventually switched off the life support, and a few months later I went with David Harvey on the same trip that I was supposed to do with Stephen. And I walked into the youth hostel in Llangollen, and I thought, my God, this is the last place that my friend Stephen, my childhood friend Stephen, had slept in before he died. And as I walked in, on the jukebox was playing the Logical song, and every time now I hear the Logical song, I go back to that place in whenever it was, 1979, and it's amazing how that does it. How songs can take you back to a time and a place in your life, which is exactly what the Logical song does. Every time I hear the opening bars, and years later I saw Roger Hodgson, the main composer in Supertramp, on a solo tour in the Royal Concert Hall. And he played this track I'd never heard, and I thought, wow, is that one of his solo songs? Is it a Supertramp song? I don't know. And a few years later I played, I asked Alexa to play Breakfast in America, thinking I knew all the songs, and then a song came up, and it's called Lord Is It Mine. Woof, what a song. It's basically him trying to understand how God can listen to all the prayers said to him. So this isn't in my top 10, but I thought I'd mention it anyway, purely because of the connection between my best mate dying and that Lord Is It Mine song. Right, the next album, which does definitely make the top 10, and this is the most influential album of my life. It's this one. Oh, there's nasty reflection, unfortunately, but I can't do anything about it. This album here is called Unknown Pleasures, and it's by a band called Joy Division. And Janetta Paprocki, who played me Hide in Your Shell, was the first person to play me a Joy Division song. And she played me a song called Transmission. And it was just out of punk. Punk was still going on, but this was a melodic band. And she also played me a song called Atmosphere, because they were the only two songs she had. Atmosphere is this haunting song, and it came in this spooky sleeve which featured a monk. And she didn't like having it in her room because she believed it was letting the demons into her bedroom. And years later, about a year later, 2 years later, she gave me the Atmosphere song, and I sold it through the New Musical Express ads, because back then there was no internet. And I met a guy in Liverpool. I met a guy in Liverpool and I sold it to him for 40 quid, and he brought his mate to confirm it was a real thing. And that particular Atmosphere single, the one that was released only in France, the limited edition of like 1478 I think it is, that now goes for anything between £800 and £1,200. So, oh dear. So anyway, Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. Eventually Janetta, and she was only into Joy Division because her boyfriend, a guy called Tim at the time, told her to get into Joy Division, as boyfriends do to girlfriends. And they split up, and she eventually said to me, I used to write to a lot of people back then, pen pals, because you didn't have the internet. To communicate with people, you never phoned them, you wrote to them. So I wrote, she said to me, I think you should write to Timothy. And I says, why? I says, well, he's a bit down at the moment because the singer in his favourite band, Joy Division, has just committed suicide. And I thought, oh God. So we started writing, and then he sent me a cassette of everything Joy Division had done up to that time. On one side of the tape was Unknown Pleasures, Joy Division's only then album released, and singles and B-sides on the other side. And I used to play this album and tape when I was producing pictures in the darkroom in my house, because I used to take a lot of black and white photography. And I listened to this album in the dark, with apart from just a red light. And a crappy little cassette. It wasn't even stereo, it was mono. And after that, it had a real effect on me. And he then said, during this hiatus of what was Joy Division going to do next, were the remaining members going to form a band, which we'll come back to, he said, let's form a band. So me and him formed a band, and he said, I'm a guitarist, you should be the bass player. So I was working at the time, and we went to Liverpool. We went to Frank Hesse's music shop to find a bass, and Frank Hesse's music shop is famous in Liverpool. It's no longer there because it's the place where all the Beatle parents bought their sons their first guitars, was from Frank Hesse's music shop. But I never bought my bass from Frank Hesse's music shop. I thought I always did, but I actually found the receipt for it. I bought it from the music shop next door called Curly's Music. So I never bought it. But I took we went back to his house in Runcorn, where I watched him playing the bass for an hour. You know, just watched him. And then eventually he let me have my own bass, which I just bought, and said, he tuned it up for us and said, right, I'll teach you how to play a really easy song. And he taught me how to play Transmission, which ironically was the first Joy Division song I'd ever heard. And the bass line is very, very simple. So he taught me how to play that. And then eventually after that, I started to learn more Joy Division songs, and we started writing together, and I'd come up with an original bass composition. I'd send it to him, and then I'd send the tape to him, then he'd listen to it, he'd put over a guitar, and then come to my house, and then we used to practice in my wash house, because where I lived in this council estate, Osmeyport, had something called a wash house. And a wash house is where actually you did your washing, and it had a sink in there and an outdoor toilet. And we used to practice in there until one day there was a knock at the door, and there was a policeman the other side of the door. One of the neighbours had complained, and he just said, cut that out now, cut it out. And I accidentally hit my bass string, and he said, now. So yeah, so we never played in the wash house again. We eventually took it into the house and just turned the noise down a bit. So we thought, oh, you know, so it was, you know, it was like the Rooftops moment where the police came on and shut down the Beatles in the on top of the Savile Row, but not quite the same. But anyway, there you go. It's my first, and not my only first, my first dealings with the law, the long arm of the law. And so Timothy and I played songs, and eventually we packed up. It all fell apart due to other reasons. And then I was just left with this bass. And the bass amp, funny enough, did come from Frank Hesse's music shop. And also a drum machine came from Frank Hesse's music shop. And the drum machine was the same drum machine that a band called New Order had bought. I'll come back to them in a moment. And as a result of then being on my own with the bass, I just thought, this is crap. I need to learn how to play guitar. Even though he'd fallen out with me, he sold me his acoustic guitar. And then I started to learn to play the guitar. And then I thought, this is far better. He can actually strum chords and make songs without just playing individual notes on a bass. And it was far better, the instrument, to create songs. And as a result of being the bass player, when I eventually went to Edinburgh District Assembly in 1980, and I met these guys from Ayr, they said to me, oh, you'll have to come up and visit us in the Ayr. And because I was a musician, they eventually said, I tell you what, you're a bass player, none of us are bass players, we've got one drummer, we've got a keyboard player and a guitarist, why don't you move from Ellesmere Port to Ayr and we'll form a band? And that's how this all started. It's only because of this album, being told to buy a bass and having a bass and then being without a group, that I was invited to move from England to Scotland to form Always the Way with the brothers in the Ayr congregation. And the rest, as they say, is history. And if you want to know what happened after that, there's another video on this channel called About Music and Me and what happened. I'm sure it's on this channel, but it might be on the Always the Way channel. But anyway, I'll go into depth of what happened with Always the Way, and it wasn't happy. So anyway, this album is the reason why I bought a bass in the first place, why I became a musician, and why I upload. If it hadn't been for this album, I probably would be still playing air guitar, which I was very good at. I was very good at playing air guitar, but this was a game changer. And you know, you get people who say an album changed their life. Unknown Pleasures changed my life. So if you've not heard it, I'd suggest you have Alexa, ask Alexa to, I'll just be quiet because Alexa's just there. Ask Alexa to play Unknown Pleasures. And you'll never hear anything like it again. The next album which makes it in the top 10 is, funny enough, the band I talked about before, New Order. This is their first album called Movement, and I just need to slip in this other iconic sleeve by New Order. This is Ceremony. This is actually what New Order and Joy Division did, is they never put singles on the had singles on the album. So this would have probably been on the album, but it didn't. So hey ho. So basically, New Order formed out the ashes of Joy Division, and New Order then me and Timothy went to see New Order in Liverpool in February 1981, and at this point we didn't know who the fourth replacement for Ian Curtis was. There was no released New Order songs, this hadn't come out, Ceremony hadn't come out, and they came on stage and it was a shock. The replacement for Ian Curtis was a girl. What's going on here? But she just played keyboards and guitar. During that gig, which none of us had heard any of the songs of before, they played all of this album and the two songs from Ceremony and In a Lonely Place. And shortly afterwards that, on the John Peel show, he played Ceremony and In a Lonely Place, the two songs from here. And Ceremony, the production on Ceremony is unbelievable. And it's more the bass playing style of Ceremony and movement that I copied or I was influenced more by than the bass playing style of Joy Division, which was quite bassy. This is more melodic, and so this influenced me because I went and bought the same drum machine that appears on here, and I then used that drum machine, and the hell of a lot of songs that I wrote when I moved to Ayr, and a hell of a lot of the songs I wrote about being a Jehovah's Witness in Ayr, when I really believed that the truth was the truth and the paradise was only round the corner. So this album here, yes, it's a bit flawed in places, but with me it's a special place in my heart. Now, New Order was the band that after I saw them twice in Liverpool. I've subsequently seen them twice in Manchester, twice in London, but the place I saw them more than any other place was when I moved from Ayr to Glasgow, was a place called the Barrowlands Ballroom. Now, the Barrowlands Ballroom, I near enough had a season ticket there, and a lot of the elders in Rutherglen didn't like the fact that I went to so many gigs at the Barrowlands, associating with worldly people, listening to worldly music. But as it happens, at the Barrowlands Ballroom, there was all the youngsters that I knew from the other congregations used to go to gigs there, and I've forgotten how many gigs I went to the Barrowlands Ballroom when I moved to Glasgow. And my time in Glasgow, it wasn't the best, to be honest with you, because of what happened in the Rutherglen congregation, which is on another video. But however, I am happy the fact that I attended the Barrowlands Ballroom and saw so many great bands. And where I live now is about an hour and a half from the Barrowlands Ballroom, and sometimes the weather has even stopped me going to gigs that I paid to go and see there. I never got to see one of the Mannix gigs at the Barrowlands or Frightened Rabbit because the weather was pish. And even now, the journey, the 3-hour journey there and back, I haven't been to the Barrowlands for a long time, sadly. And when I was in Glasgow, I could walk from the Barrowlands to where I lived in Rutherglen. And then when I moved to East Kilbride, I could just drive. It's like 20 minutes, but now it's just a little bit too far. But there's a book that came out which details every gig that was at the Barrowlands. And the first gig I ever went to the Barrowlands Ballroom was not to see New Order. That was my second. It was actually to see the Simple Minds, and that was in January of 1985. And by that time, the Simple Minds had brought an album called New Gold Dream, which was an absolute classic. But after that, I think it all went downhill personally. And when I went to see them, I'd originally seen Simple Minds in Glasgow when I was visiting once, and I went to see them in a place called Mayfair. I think it's called the Mayfair Club. Before they'd even had before. They were massive, and that was a far better gig than the one at the Barrowlands. But the good thing about the Barrowlands was the support was a band called the Armory Show. The Armory Show had in it, the singer was a guy called Richard Jobson, and Richard Jobson used to be in the Skids. And the guys in the Skids with Richard Jobson was a guy called Stuart Adamson, who formed Big Country, who then sadly killed himself. But the guitarist in the Armory Show was a guy called John McGeoch. And John McGeoch was all over the punk bands. He was in Susie and the Banshees, he was in Susie and the Banshees, he was in Magazine, he was in Public Image as well, and another couple of bands. He was, and literally he was just like feet from me, and it was amazing. It was amazing show. I don't know, I'm a bit confused actually, because I'm sure I saw Simple Minds twice there, but the Army Show were definitely the support. And then when they were doing one of their songs called New Gold Dream, actually on stage walked Bono from U2, and U2 previously just played the Barrowlands before it moved to Glasgow, and U2 I don't think never played the Barrowlands after that. They then just got too big, which was a shame, because I'd like to see U2 at the Barrowlands before they got too big and Bono's head got too massive as well. But I've got a list here, due to the book over there written in the Barrowlands, of all the bands that I went to see in the Barrowlands during the time when I was a Jehovah's Witness. And these are the bands I saw at the Barrowlands. And some of these bands I not just saw once, some of them I saw twice, 3, 4, 5 times. But here's the list, and it is quite, and this is only the one venue, because I saw, there's other venues in Glasgow I saw a lot of other bands at, but this is this is just the Barrowlands ballroom list that I went to see bands at. Simple Minds, New Order, The Smiths, Marillion, Echo and the Bunnymen, Aztec Camera, Cocteau Twins, Deacon Blue, Texas, Ian McCulloch, Fish, James, The Australian Doors, The Cure, Manic Street Preachers, Suede, Shed 7, Ocean Colour Scene, Cooler Shaker, Cast, Manson, The Seahorses, The Verve, Ian Brown, Embrace, Richard Ashcroft, Pulp, Doves, JJ72 and BBM. And BBM, you're thinking, who are they? BBM was actually Gary Moore, Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce. And of course Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce were in Cream. And they did Cream songs. And of course Gary Moore had been in Thin Lizzy. But actually the support band were better. They were a Glasgow band. I can't remember that they were. We were doing really fantastic blues. And I kid you not, some of these gigs that I went to, there's moments in your life which are, at that time, it's like you've died and gone to heaven, which I don't believe in. And some of these times, when you're at a gig and you're there and the band starts playing the opening bars of your favourite tune and everybody around you is it's pure, it's an ethereal moment. It's just like you can't, the connection between you and the band and you and the people around you is amazing. And the reason why I had to check a book out for the list is because when I used to go to the Barrowlands Ballroom, I used to crowd surf. I used to turn around my back to the audience and say to the person in front of me, lift me up, and they're looking at me thinking, what's this? Lift me up. So that I had to get them to lift me up, so then I'd go on the back of the guy in front of me, his head, and go over the top. And then I used to crowd surf and then drop down the bottom. The bouncers would pull you down. And sometimes they'd say, if I see your face again, you're out. And sometimes they thought it was a good humour, and then you did it again. And of course, all that dancing, all that sweating, all that crowd surfing, by the time you got out, your little ticket stub, it faded away to nothing. So I don't have a ticket stub for lots of the gigs I went to the Barrowlands Ballroom. And I've got some fantastic memories of being at the Barrowlands. And one of the funniest was when I saw Richard Ashcroft at the Barrowlands Ballroom. The singer out the Verve, they'd split up at this moment and then reformed again, and I saw them again at Glasgow at another venue. And Richard Ashcroft came on, and he came on and saw it, he says, yeah, Glasgow, Barrowlands. And then out of my eye in slow motion, I could see this plastic pint flying in slow-mo through the air. It was full of half a pint, and I used to do the same. You know, when you always had a beer, you always saved a bit, so when the band came on, you threw it. Not at the bar, I usually used to throw it towards the front of the audience, to be honest with you. You know, because if you were at the front, you were expected to get a beer on your head. But this beer went through the air, and I could see it, and sort of time stood still as I could see this pint, half pint, plastic gas flying through the air, and it hit Richard Ashcroft on the side of the face and just span off. And it was one of those moments I thought, oh no, he's going to walk. But he didn't. He took it. He took it on the chin, quite literally, and he carried on. Fantastic gig. One of the great moments at the Barrowlands, and there were many others. So we'll then crack on to this album here. Oh, it's wrong way around. That's better. It's just called Crosby, Stills and Nash, and of course it's by Crosby, Stills and Nash. And the reason why I brought this up here, I was the child of the 60s, I loved the 60s, and I watched the Woodstock film just before I left Ellesmere Port to move to Ayr Congregation, and I had to watch it into my auntie's house, because at that time we didn't have a TV. We couldn't afford the TV licence or something, and so to watch TV, I had to go to my auntie's house, and we sat there and watched it. And Crosby, Stills and Nash do a song called Sweet Judy Blue Eyes on the Woodstock, and it's a defining moment of the 60s, I think, as is the Woodstock Festival. And that particular song, it was amazing. And I've seen Crosby, Stills and Nash quite a few times since. And to me, this was always the highlight of this album. Is a fantastic album. It's just, I realised later on that I was born in the right decade. I wish I was born probably the end of the 50s, so that maybe or whatever, the mid 50s, so maybe I could have gone to Woodstock. And then, funny enough, an elder in the Ellesmere Port Kingdom Hall, Mal Pearce, and his wife were at Woodstock. They actually went to Woodstock. I don't know how much they ever remember of it, and I wish I'd spoken more to him about his Woodstock experiences, but I never did. And it's a shame, because he also grew up with Lennon, McCartney and Harrison, and he grew up in Liverpool and knew all these guys personally. He was at Woodstock, he saw Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I wish I'd been there, but unfortunately I was born too late. I can only just, but anyway, what a fantastic album. And there's all the spin-offs from then Neil Young joined them as Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and then of course you can go on from that. So you've got all the individual solo projects, all the spin-offs from Crosby, Stills and Nash, but this is where you must stand off. And of course, the person who David Crosby discovered a young Canadian girl, her name was Joni Mitchell. Graham Nash, who was known as Willie to everybody who knows him, eventually became Joni Mitchell's partner, and one of Joni Mitchell's famous album Ladies of Canyon, there's a song called Willie, which is about Graham Nash. So yeah, that album there. So that's all my mostly witnessy type of stuff. This is where it all starts going tits up for me. This is when I'm starting to come out of the whole witness thing. And this is where we get this album here. Oh, I've got the wrong way around. The Stone Roses. The Stone Roses. This is their debut album. And when it comes to a debut album, this can't probably be bettered, apart from maybe Unknown Pleasures. This is the Stone Roses album. When it came to realising that there's something up with the Witnesses, I then needed something else in my life, and that other thing in my life ended up being my other passion, which had been for many years and which had been deprived to me because I lived in Scotland, was Manchester United. Somehow I found out that there was a bus that left Glasgow that went to the games, and then I started associating with these worldly people on the bus and actually find out there were some really good lads. And on that bus, on a cassette, they played an awful lot of songs from this album by the Stone Roses, and most of the Stone Roses members of the group are United fans, but I think the drummer may be a City fan actually. And I met Ian Brown once outside Old Trafford, because Ian Brown, the lead singer of Stone Roses, actually goes to the games. He's got a season ticket, but I can't say how important this album is. And still, when I go on the supporters bus to Old Trafford from Glasgow, you get the odd Stone Roses song, and every person knows the words from every song, and it's an amazing album. And the bass playing and guitar work and the drumming on it they are exceptional musicians. It's amazing. So this really signifies me finally coming out the Witnesses. So it comes to the next one. We're down to the last three. The last is it the last three? No, last four I should say. The next album here that comes into it is Fairport Convention, What We Did on Our Holidays. This is a band that I've only recently got into, and I should have been into them years ago, and I'll explain why by this album here. This album here is by a guy called Nick Drake, and I first heard Nick Drake in the year 2000, just as I'd left the Witnesses, and this is an album called Brighter Later, and Nick Drake's song was on a free CD by a magazine called Uncut, and a lot of the music I now listen to is due to Uncut magazine's recommendation. And one of the songs from Nick Drake was on this free CD, and from this free CD I thought, I need to listen more to this guy. I bought a compilation album, and because of Alexa, I was able then to buy. I listened to the albums. Then I bought every album of his on CD, and I eventually got this lovely one in vinyl. This album here, in the summer I play every single day, along with another album which is my #1 album. So actually this is actually my #2, but you have to listen. This is combining with this. The reason being is because it was only by listening to the track personnel of this album, because Nick Drake's a solo artist, that when I read the track personnel and googled them, I found out that the people who played on the tracks came from this band, Fairport Convention, only to find out that in Fairport Convention, one of the lead singers in Fairport Convention was a girl called Sandy Denny. And Sandy Denny I also listened to in 2000, just as I'd left the Witnesses, due to a free track on an uncut playlist CD. And I'd listened to Sandy Denny all my life. I'd listened to Sandy Denny all my life, and from the year 2000, and I'd absolutely loved her, but I never realised she was in Fairport Convention. How did I miss that? Because I'd only had her solo stuff. She was in Fairport Convention. She is on this album called What We Did in Our Holidays. And some of the songs in this album are just absolutely stunning. So if there's ever one Fairport Convention album that you want to play, it's What We Did in Our Holidays. And I've only since November last year got into Fairport Convention, purely because of looking at the personnel on the Nick Drake album Brighter Later, then making the connection to Sandy Denny and Fairport, and now I've started, now Fairport Convention are now the most important band to me. It's funny how that happens, but they are, and I wish I'd got into Fairport Convention a long time ago, because then I would have been able to see Fairport with members of the band who've sadly passed away. A guy called Dave Swarbrick. Dave Swarbrick, fantastic vocalist, fantastic fiddle player, violinist. And unfortunately Dave Swarbrick's dead. I'll never see Fairport. But funny enough, I have seen Fairport Convention. I went to see them in August. I'm seeing them in Carlisle in 2 months' time as well. So Fairport Convention now are to me my most important band, but I wish they'd been more important, played a bigger part of my life since then. But hey ho, that's Fairport. Miles Davis, Kind of Blue. Yet again, I kept on seeing a Kind of Blue and Miles Davis coming up in Uncut magazine in like top 30 albums that you should have. And I eventually, I think I asked Alexa to play Kind of Blue and Miles Davis. And when I listened to it, I was like, oh my God. This album was a game changer in jazz music. If you ever wanted just to listen to somebody who's at the top of his game and his fellow musicians, it's this album, and it is a really good album to play if you're having a romantic meal with your partner, whoever that may be. Just ask Alexa to play A Kind of Blue by Miles Davis. He did another influential album which I've listened to, but it's not as good as this. This is the dog's bollocks. So we come back to this. This is my #2 still, Brighter Later. Like I said, I brought it in a bit earlier because I wanted to show the connection between this and Fairport. But hey ho. Sadly, Nick Drake never got success in his lifetime. He produced like 3 albums and he eventually committed suicide because of the lack of commercial success. He is only now finally getting the recognition he deserved. If there's an album that you want to listen to, and some of the string arrangements on this album are stunning, and the musicianship from all the guys from Fairport Convention is stunning as well, please listen to this album. The number one album, the album I now play more, probably the album I played more than any album ever. I got into just before my son was born, so this was 1998. I went on holiday in Rhodes. I was still a witness at the time. I had a fantastic holiday with a bunch of worldly people. It was a relief to get away from the crustiness of the witnesses. Had a great time, a great group. We all happened to be in this little hotel complex in Rhodes in Greece. And I played, after sitting on the pool all day or going visiting places, went back and me and my wife jointly played the cassette of this album and another one, but the other one I don't have on vinyl, so it doesn't get into my top 10 vinyl. But this is the album. This is the album that I play more than any other album. This gets played now all the time because every time it's a sunny day I stick this on and this takes me back to being happy, contented and in Rhodes. It is Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. Wowee. I knew Marvin Gaye due to, you know, his songs like Heard It Through the Grapevine and his songs with Tammy Terrell, but this is it. This is the album. If there's any album that unfortunately if you're going to be stuck on a desert island with, it's this one you should be stuck with. What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. In fact, I bought this album and I still have not I'm still waiting for that moment where I'm going to just cut down the cellophane. And I've had this now. I bought this 2 Christmases ago. I got it as a Christmas present. And I still, I'm waiting for the special moments when I'm going to play it on my record player. I just haven't got round it. It's going to be a big moment for me. So yeah, every sunny day, every day when I'm on holiday, if it's in the back garden or if it's in Spain or whenever, I always play this album. I listen to it and there's things I hear for the first time. Just things. And the amazing thing about it is there's a guy called James Jamerson who's the bass player who is on these songs. And Paul McCartney watched a documentary of him recently and he said that he'd heard James Jamerson playing on other songs and he adapted his playing style to play like James Jamerson. James Jamerson's all over this album. It is phenomenal. It really is. It's my most played album, and it's my most favourite album. And I think it's my son's favourite album because I've influenced. Well, he's had no choice really because if he's been in the back garden with us, he has to listen to it. But he sings along with What's Going On. So that's my top 10. And I just want to end on one other thing. This album here, this is not in my top 10 albums. This is called Madness, One Step Beyond. And the only reason why I bring this out is because if you had been at the Edinburgh Assembly, you would have seen me having this in a bag. And the reason why I had it is because this album was released in 1980. And prior to that, in the NME, which I used to buy it, they asked people to send in pictures of themselves to appear on the Madness sleeve. So the Madness sleeve came out and I looked for a picture of that I'd sent in and it wasn't there. And of course it was in Woolies and it was all sealed up. I thought, what a pile of shite that was. What a waste of time. So, a couple of months later, I was working at Shell Oil Refinery and somebody came up to me and somebody said to me, "You're on an album sleeve." And I went, "What?" He said, "Yeah, your face is on an album sleeve." I said, "What, you mean the Madness one?" And he says, "Yes." I says, "No, it's not." He says, "It is, it's on the inside sleeve." I went, "Really?" So of course, that night, when I got to Woolies, I went and bought the Madness album, only to find out that what had happened is that on the inside sleeve was a bunch of pictures of people who sent them in. And if you look very carefully, although I know nothing like this, people only recognise it now because they look like my son. But that picture there, can you see it? Where's my thumb? Ah, there we go. So that, no, I'm the wrong side, you dicky. No, I'm confusing myself here. Where is it? Come down. Go up. Ah, there we go. So it's that picture there. That is me. And there you go. I don't look nothing like that. It's that my son looks more like me now due to some terrible cosmetic surgery that happened to my face at some time. But that's me. And so that's my only claim to fame, that I do appear on an album sleeve. Shame it isn't an Always the Way album sleeve, but Always the Way has ever released any vinyl. We probably won't. And even the album sleeves, all the sleeves that I do for the likes of iTunes and Amazon Play and all those carry-ons, I've tried to do some. I don't try to put pictures of the band on it because we're all a bunch of ugly baldy bastards now. So that's it. So anyway, that's it. That's my top 10 vinyls. If I'd included CDs in that, it would have been different, but I was only using vinyls because I think vinyls looks a hell of a, you know, I wish I hadn't got rid of all my vinyl, to be honest with you, but there you go. So anyway, yeah, that was long, wasn't it? Right, so anyway, so if we're all still here tomorrow, if you worked your way through all of that, if we're all here tomorrow, if you can put on your comments your top 10 songs, because I'm hoping that somebody will watch this video and go, oh, I've never played that, and will play it and will love it as much as I do. So I'm hoping that other people can recommend albums to me that I'm not aware of, because there's hundreds and thousands out there. I'd like somebody to put in their top 10 and say, before you die, you need to listen to these top 10, and then I can easily say to my little friend over there to play them, and then, you know, hey ho, I may be won over by an artist or an album that's gone completely off my radar. So hopefully some of those, the explanation to these albums, of my connection to them, will certainly encourage some people to buy them. And that's it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave some comments and have a nice day, and hopefully we'll all be here tomorrow. Bye bye.